Okay, I think we are live. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to the Blocks webinar, the Backbone of Web3 Applications, Building with Blockchain Data. Thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your busy day. I'm Rebecca Stevens, and I'm an analyst on our research data team here at the Block, and I'm so excited to host our discussion today. Today, we will be talking about how to best leverage blockchain data to understand and predict trends in the Web3 space. With an ecosystem that is so committed to transparency, there is a lot of data out there to be utilized, but also a lot of mistakes to avoid. We will look at best practices when using blockchain data, real-world examples of success in the blockchain space, and how to navigate obstacles when delving into this big data world. I'm thrilled to be joined by our amazing group of panelists today, who I'll let introduce themselves. Let's go around in alphabetical order, and you can share your name, where you work, your role, and anything else you want to share. So Shirag, you'll go first.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. Great to be here. I'm Chirag. I'm the co-founder at Blaze. We use on-chain data and join that with off-chain data to help marketers and growth leaders essentially use this data and grow their products and platforms. Cool. And Jim, are you next?
Excited to be here. I'm Jim Myers, CTO, co-founder of Flipside Crypto. Flipside makes blockchain data accessible and usable, and we do that by partnering directly with blockchain foundations. And we have a community of over 100,000 users interacting with our data, from individual analysts all the way to companies such as Bitwave and Blaze here that are building products on top of Flipside.
Hey everyone, my name is Pat White. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Bitwave, and I just realized that our names are alphabetical in the exact same order, whether you go by first name or last name. That's pretty amazing there. Really incredible. I'd say so. Bitwave, we're a back office solution for businesses that use digital assets. So accounting, tax, ARAP, everything that you could possibly imagine up and down the stack there. And where I fit into this, of course, is that we are a deep practitioner and user of a lot of this data. So we build our own data sets, but of course we use data sets and we, my view on this is that, we tend to require incredibly high fidelity data for financial reporting. So I sort of bring a slightly different view than maybe from a data science perspective, where you're looking at kind of like trends. We're looking in terms of like really high fidelity data. So this should be a really fun conversation today.
Okay, so as you can tell, we've got a great group for our discussion. And also, as we begin, feel free to type any questions you have in the questions box, which is like separate from the chat. And we'll save like 15 minutes towards the end of the webinar to answer your guys' questions. So let's start by discussing how to best leverage blockchain data. So how do you use blockchain data to inform your understanding and perception of Web3 projects?
Well, I can start on my side, which is I'll talk about how we tend to use it. Our customers include folks like Flipside, folks like OpenSea and Magic Eden and companies like that. And so where we use blockchain data is we're trying to figure out how much money you are spending or how much money you're making. So revenue and expenses from an accounting and then a tax perspective. So if you think about someone like OpenSea, this is where things get super interesting in this kind of conversation. OpenSea does 50 million transactions a year. Something like Magic Eden maybe does 250 million on Solana. We have customers that do up to about 3 billion transactions a year. The scale of blockchain data is unlike anything else you've ever kind of imagined. And if you think about like one of our customers who does 3 billion transactions a year, they're maybe making a hundredth or a thousandth of a penny on each of those transactions. But you do that 3 billion times and you can make some real money. So that's kind of where we have to use data to both have like transaction level visibility in terms of like, hey, on this one transaction, you made a hundredth of a penny. But then also you have to be able to aggregate that all together to say, hey, over the course of a month, here's how much money you made. Here's what you booked into QuickBooks. Here's what your cost basis was for tax purposes, all that sort of stuff. That's how we use it.
Yeah, I would also say too, I always think about how ironic it is that as for open as blockchains are, the data is like actually really difficult to use out of the box. And I think about that in two ways. Like, A, is it accessible? Like, is it indexed or saved in a pattern that makes sense for what you're trying to build? And is it usable? Like, how do you represent a canonical, say, like NFT fee or a transaction? And typically it's, bringing together all these different types of events and saying, okay, well, did these things co-occur together? or is it between say these two parties in this protocol? And so like what is source of truth is really fascinating when you start to think about like how do you make sense of bringing these granular events up into something like high level that platforms can use. And so we spend a lot of time sort of building that translation layer and then saying, okay, like how do we make it indexed into formats that are good for different types of use cases, types of building?
Yeah, I can, and we can share our use case. So we're actually thankful for like partners like Flipside, who actually like on top of whom Blaze is built on. And I think Flipside does an amazing job of putting the data in format, which is super useful. And like for us as like a data engineering and our data science team to understand the data, and then we repurpose that data to actually provide aggregate insights to marketers and growth folks. And that's kind of where things get interesting, because you're not just using data on chain, but there's like like when we think about Web3, there's of course there's all the on-chain events that's happening, but there's also a lot of like marketing actions and like things which are happening in existing platforms which you all know about, and then like tying all of those in to get insights. And we're kind of like very up funnel that way, because we are able to see like what kind of projects are doing well and what kind of things are like working well for those projects in terms of like marketing events and activities and things like that. And like it's pretty interesting, because like if in traditional marketing, if you kind of analyze the data, like if you're providing marketing software, it's very hard to get that conversion data back. It's like, I mean, you need a ton of integrations and sometimes you miss events and things like that. It's amazing that like with the blockchain, you're actually able to see those attribution and conversion events, and then like kind of like build like help your customers build better campaigns on top of that. So for us, it's not just helps us in like seeing trends as to like which projects are doing well, what's like and what's working, but also helps us kind of like close the loop in terms of the marketing funnel.
Yeah. And honestly, Jim says something that's worth repeating, not to waste time, but like it's so easy to think the blockchain data, like blockchain, it is just data, right? Like that's all we built here. How could it possibly be hard to get? But in fact, it's incredibly difficult to get a lot of blockchain data in a usable way. And a lot of it comes down to depending on, honestly, like you look at someone like Solana, even beyond all the other challenges you have around blockchain data, suddenly Solana then takes your volume and 10x's it compared to everything else. Ethereum doesn't keep, the Ethereum nodes don't keep full queryable data past 199 blocks. Like there's all these different limitations you run into that means you have to sort of like, for every single chain you interact with, you run into different problems, you come up with different things, and you have to come up with different solutions to actually be able to make that data usable for your business.
100%, yeah.
Okay, so I guess kind of pivoting off that point, since there is so much data and there is so much abstraction that needs to be done, what tools are you using to collect data and help assess the current state of Web3 projects?
Jim, why don't you?
We think about this in sort of two ways inside of Flipside. So we have a data engineering group, which is responsible for basically streaming in data from all the chains, sort of working with a lot of the nuances with these various networks and sort of thinking about redundancy around like things like node networks. But it's fairly low level data that they are basically streaming in real time to our platform. And then the second part is it gets pretty interesting where you think about, okay, you've got all this raw data and how do you actually make sense of it for different parts of these ecosystems. And so we, for that part of this, we rely pretty heavily on a tool called DBT. And a lot of our thinking there is we've encountered over the past several years in building Flipside all of these experts in different niche ecosystems throughout the space. And a lot of them have SQL skills, right? A lot of people are analysts. And so DBT is a tool where you can take your SQL skills and apply some engineering best practices to it. And you can actually then build out different data sets. And so we have teams of analysts that go really deep on different ecosystems. They're experts in them. And then they're using tools like DBT to curate up that data to a higher level for people to consume. So those are two main tools. This proprietary tool we have called Streamline to bring in lots of raw data from all these networks, and then DBT, all these SQL experts building on top.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit. So when you're getting into blockchain data, you basically have to ask yourself two questions, or one question to start with. But you're asking yourself, like, do I only need data going forward, or do I need full historic data and comprehensive sets of historic data? So something like Bitwave, where we're doing accounting data, someone's going to come to us with an address, and just some random address, and we don't know what it is beforehand, and we need to be able to get all their data. So we need full historic data, that is a full index of the blockchain, which means you have to go back in time, starting at the beginning of the blockchain, and then sync all the data forward into a data warehouse or something that you can kind of use. Some people, like, let's say you want to go out and you want to build a payments company. You don't actually need historic data because you don't care about historic data because the payments that you're going to be supporting haven't happened yet. So you can go and you can build something that more like starts at the block today and only looks at blocks going forward for the actual data that you care about. So there's a set of like questions like that will make your job easier or much harder because indexing data is incredibly difficult. Like I always like to not beat up, but like there's a blockchain called Flow out there, and the way that they do their hard forks, they've lost data. There's weeks of data that's unavailable. When you want to get it, what you have to do is you end up going onto one of their Discord channels, and you find someone who has a backup of a node from that period of time, and you restore that node. So it's if you don't need full indexes of data, you don't need that's a really, really good thing, and you should just design all your software and systems not to do it. But if you do need full historic data, be aware that it seems like an easy problem, but it is in fact a very difficult problem. And that's where companies like Flipside can help you, like Bitwave on the accounting side, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, super helpful for perspectives from Jim and Pat, and kind of 100% concur. Even though we use Flipside, there's a ton of stuff which you need to go and find the right Discord to find the right query or the right, the right missing sort of data to fill things in. I think the one thing which we uniquely do, and for our use case, is actually build labels on top of some of the data which is available. And so for us, it kind of needs us to understand that historical data, and then build models on top of that. Let's say to help our customers understand what kind of a user or a let's say persona is behind that contract or behind that wallet address. And so that's something which we have been scaling capabilities for the last few months, and I think that's been it's something that we're going to continue investing. And so that needs us to be basically kind of tie together pieces of information for that wallet address across different chains and things like that, and then be able to create let's say human understandable labels and what does this mean, and kind of use that for being able to reach out to people. So that's one unique thing. So we have to build some interesting models. They're kind of very similar stack to what Jim mentioned, and few add-ons from them.
We actually there's a pretty good question someone asked in the chat here that could be interesting to this conversation, which was someone asked because I said the term high fidelity data, and I think between Chirag and I, we have slightly different use cases in terms of looking at high level trends versus accounting for every single transaction in a blockchain. That really changes how you can what tools are available to you and how do you even think about data from that perspective. So I'll talk about Chirag, if you want to talk about trends and that kind of high level stuff, I can talk about sort of the high fidelity data. When I say high fidelity data, what I mean is that we can't miss a single transaction. We have to have every single transaction that a wallet participated in has to be accounted for correctly. That seems really easy, but it's not. It's one of those things. It seems like such a silly thing to say. But for instance, let's take on Ethereum token transactions. So when you move tokens between wallets, there is no native way to say, hey, Mr. Node, give me all the token transactions. What you're actually having to do is you have to say, hey, Mr. Node, go to, for all the log messages, look at indexed log, index slot 2, and give me all of the transactions where index slot 2 matches this particular address. And so you're not making this native call to get tokens. You're making this kind of high level call that's abstracted that you then need to parse on the other side. And so a lot of data sources won't even have that kind of data if they haven't parsed it out correctly. So it's something to keep track of. Is it if you need accounting level data, which is yes, we are we are accounting for every single transaction. We need to capture every single transaction. You need to think about all the different ways the data can get represented on the blockchain, which is not just the native transactions.
Yeah, and I think for us, yeah, of course, like not that we want to miss transactions or events if we can avoid it, but like I think for us it's less important of like our margin of error is a bit higher. I think like it's what we need is like to be able to understand at an aggregate level for wallets and things like that. So it doesn't need to be every single transaction, but we definitely want to understand like what are the projects this a wallet is interacting with, and like what kind of like behavior or the things like that we can infer from that. So that's kind of what we do, and like fortunately like there are like millions of users using these products, and then like there are like of course like several hundreds of millions of transactions. So you can infer a lot, like even if like a few events are missed here and there. So I think like for us, like just relying on a provider, it kind of helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also add in terms of like when we think about comprehensibility of data, it's it's not just the transaction, like Pat was alluding to. It's like what's in events, but then if you go even further than that, there are when you interact with a smart contract, there are state changes that ultimately do not get reflected just in the transaction data you might pull from a node. And so you need to actually look at the diffs in states, and you need to actually, in some cases, ask for the contract state at particular points. So when you think about fidelity and comprehensibility, it's quite a lot of information and sources almost from a node you have to pull from to get that entire complete picture.
Okay, and on that note, I think you guys have highlighted a few of them. Like I know Pat talked about Flow blockchain, and you guys were talking about just the volume of data you need to collect. But for more traditional companies who like maybe don't have experience in the crypto space but are looking to like maybe pivot into it or start like trying to track things, like what should they be aware of and like looking out for coming into the space?
Yeah, I think I can start there, like because we've had a number of like iterations of all start in terms of like analyzing the data, and I think one of the things would be like just to simplify the architecture as much as possible, and then like reducing the number of dependencies. I think when we got started, we started integrating with a large number of different vendors, and we also like experimented a bit with like streaming some of this data on our own and like storing things, and like all of those things like individual projects, and you'll find like tools or projects which kind of help you do that. But when you're starting to do that at scale and across like large number of chains, it kind of adds up and adds a significant overhead to your engineering and dev team. So I think like if someone asked me today, and like learnings from our last couple of years of building at Blaze, like what I would recommend is like to simplify the architecture a lot, and like use and also be forward looking in terms of like, okay, if you're working with a certain partners and vendors, like are they going to be the ones who can scale up to the like next X chains or like a Y level of transactions and things like that, and then make your decision there. And because migrating out from different solutions is actually like much bigger overhead, and actually might take the team away from doing the most important things which add value to your customer.
Yeah, I would say, building on what Chirag said, like when we have customers that come to us, it's pretty common for them to have tried at first to like build everything. And so like thinking like, oh, like I'm going to tackle everything first. And we're in a space that's so early where like a lot of the infrastructure has yet to be built. And so when you get started, it's easy to get distracted and think that you're going to work on, say, core underlying infrastructure. But then as you build your project over time, it becomes really, really complex. And so we see a lot of people like do that initially and then realize, wow, I'm actually not spending as much time as I should be focused on my product for my users, solving that problem, spending more time on what I call the problem before the problem.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the only advice I'll offer on top of this one is that, because Chirag and Jim had great points there, is just that, as a startup, if you're looking to get in the space as a startup, focus on the problem that you are directly solving. Like, it's one of those funny things that, like, for technical people, it is really nice there are really hard problems around crypto data. Like, there just are. And that's why there's been a lot of companies that popped up working on crypto data, because it's a fun engineering problem. But remember, as a startup, like you're not here to find fun engineering problems. You're here to solve problems for individuals and get money for solving those problems. Like that's the goal of a startup. So it's really easy to get sidetracked and think about data in the abstract. But what you want to do is always focus on data in the very concrete of what problem you're trying to solve.
Cool. And on the topic of using data for like trying to solve a problem that you want to solve, how do you like decide when you're doing your data, when you're utilizing your data, like how do you focus on collection versus analysis? Like do you have separate teams working on those things, and like how much time do you spend per each?
I'll speak for Bitwave. We do have we have a team that focuses on the integrations with exchanges and blockchains that we integrate with. And then we have a separate team that focuses on kind of the more business logic pieces of accounting and tax rules and all of that kind of stuff. So we have separated those out because they're very different skill sets. Like the engineer that builds kind of a REST API for accounting, or even like we actually have CPAs turned engineers on our engineering team. It's very, very, very different than someone who thinks about kind of the hard problem of acquiring data from blockchains. You know, what I like to say about Bitwave, and it's a good way to think about this in general, is that there's sort of like three different really, really hard engineering problems and computer science problems that we work on. And this goes for everyone on this call here that, you know, first and foremost, you know, syncing data is actually a hard engineering problem. Like it's a computer science, it's a like difficult computer science problem that's been worked on for at this point like 50 years. So getting data from blockchain A into database B is in fact a very difficult engineering problem. And companies, billion-dollar companies are built doing nothing but that. Second of all, financial data is very difficult, of which blockchain data is. And this gets back to this idea of fidelity, is that if you miss a transaction, someone's missing $1 million, like, boy, you have unhappy customers because of that. And then finally, as soon as you start doing anything with smart contracts, which a lot of folks in the blockchain space do, smart contract development is one of the hardest engineering problems you'll ever touch also. I mean, it's by far, like I sort of think that there's not more than 100 people in the world that can really do good smart contract development. Like it's like building rockets for NASA. Like you get one chance for it. If you screw it up, you have people probably don't die, but lots of money can go sideways. So these are incredibly difficult engineering problems, and you want to focus on as few of those as you possibly can in this space. So if you're just doing smart contract work, really focus on being the absolute best at that, and try to offload some of the other work to other folks, and vice versa for the other disciplines there.
Yeah, I think for us, going back to the question, in terms of we actually had a Swiss Army knife of engineers, who were kind of doing everything, and what we realized, that's kind of not going to scale. So right now we have a team which is focused around managing what we call as the feed infrastructure, and then we are also kind of hiring out a team of analysts who are going to help us. So we're going to focus. Sole job is going to focus on analyzing the data which we have already aggregate and things like that. And we feel that's kind of the pathway for us to scale, because some of the data requests which we get from a customer getting extremely complex, and it needs people to spend almost 100% of their day job to actually be able to get those answers. And I think one of the questions is okay, what's some of the examples of data analysis of blockchain data? Some of the things which our customers ask us is okay, hey, analyze who are the participants of this contract, and then also what are some of the contracts which those participants are part of, and then what's the best approach to reach out to them? Is there an on-chain approach through the on-chain notifications, or is it via some off-chain methods and things like that? And what more can you tell us about those wallets? Do you have some additional labels, etc.? Are they frequent trader? Are new to crypto? Do they participate in certain type of projects? So those are the type of things which we try to infer from on-chain data.
Yeah, I would say over time, everything that we have done, similar to what Chirag and Pat have said, is just become more and more specialized in terms of roles and people. It's, Pat pointed out, these really challenging problems, which focusing on just one of them alone is really difficult, let alone focusing on multiple. Even within our data engineering team, where we've kind of split this out into a couple functions, everything from say the syncing of the data, but even we have teams now just focused on nodes, and we work with both external vendors for nodes, but also internal nodes that we also run on bare metal. Just because of the types of things that we're asking of this require us to run very specialized hardware sometimes. But yeah, specialization is really the trick.
Okay, so it seems like all of your companies have evolved to like meet the challenge of blockchain data. So I guess like just looking back, what has been your biggest success that you can remember, or the biggest success that you've seen when you've been like incorporating blockchain data or like working with it?
Chirag, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. I think probably one of our most recent successes, again, going back to what Blaze does, Blaze essentially uses on-chain and off-chain data, joins them, and helps you run like marketing and growth campaigns. And yeah, we have successes when our customers have successes. That's putting it as simply as that. So we ran this campaign for this music NFT company, and one of the key things they wanted to understand is what are some of the channels to target their users on, and then what can we tell about those users and kind of in terms of the other projects and things like that. So, and what they use is they use this data for personalizing those messaging. So instead of having a very spammy message which most people click off or delete, what we really help them with is create an extremely personalized message to their potential customers, and then basically based on some of their transactions as well as some of the auction data, and then kind of highlighted an extremely personalized campaign there, and we help them reduce the CAC significantly than what we were used to, and they were like, wow, we had no clue this was even possible, and thank you so much. So that's been one of our biggest wins, and we have been able to do this for a number of companies across different from infra to DeFi projects to NFT projects and things like that. So and I think as we scale out our infrastructure and analytics, we feel like we can help a lot more companies out.
Yeah, I'd say similar. I mean, success in our business is success of our customers, accomplishing what they need to do. And that's, for me, that's some of our bigger clients, in terms of transaction volume, the OpenSeas, Magic Edens, Sedaros, those guys, that's always delightful, where you basically, end up with, helping someone close books of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of transactions. That is really, really a good feeling. Hey, because honestly, in our space, it's one of those things that's super interesting. Is in accounting, 100 million transactions is a lot of transactions. I mean, I think that's kind of a silly thing to say, but 100 million transactions would be a large regional retailer might do 100 million transactions. Walmart might do a couple hundred million, across the entire world. And so to see, billions of transactions, which we see it's just a different kind of problem within the accounting space, which ends up being really, really, really fun to work on, because it's just not something that most people kind of do on a daily basis. So we have a lot of fun with that. That's our success comes from when our customers accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Yeah, I'd echo some of what Pat and Chirag have said, and this reminds me of a conversation I was having a few weeks ago. I was talking to the founder of another blockchain infrastructure company, and he said to me, he was like, we're all just a beta on this whole space, meaning we only grow when the space grows. And I think that's true. Our company's growth is dependent on the space, but I think a more optimistic take on that is, we can collectively drive that growth. There's a ton of friction today in the space for builders, for users, that results in this massive gulf between what's possible and what's reality. And I think if just talk with Bitwave here and Blaze, if you can speed up, using data, you can speed up their product development, then these guys are reducing friction for other teams that are trying to build in the space or other individuals in the space, which is enabling growth for the whole ecosystem. So I think we're all working on these various parts of the stack, and in turn, we're all working to basically turn potential energy into kinetic energy here.
Yeah, I think about that too sometimes. It's really interesting where it's there are companies that are so intimately tied to user adoption. So like I think about some of the retail tax companies that are out there, like Zen Ledger is a good example. Like their fortunes are so incredibly tied to new individuals getting into crypto that they are right. There's straight data on retail adoption. But if you step back from that, I think that like, and this is going to sound terrible, like there's a quote of like, be the change you want to see in the world, which is, it's a much, broader quote than talking about business and blockchain. But it is one of those things where it's like, there are amazing things that blockchain can make possible. And the more that people sit around waiting for retail consumers to get excited about the price of crypto, the less that we're actually moving the industry forward. And so the stuff that is really exciting is all the payment stuff that's happening, all the new settlement layer stuff that the institutions are getting into, all of those types of things that are fundamentally changing the way the business of money will operate. That's the really, really exciting stuff. And for me, I always tell people who are looking to build in the space or get in the space, like, don't work, like try to avoid projects where you do end up being just straight beta on retail adoption. So things that are tied to the price of Bitcoin, leverage ETF, like ETFs, all that kind of stuff. And try to think about like what are the fundamental reasons that blockchain is different than traditional financial systems, and build tooling around that to basically drive business forward, make businesses more efficient, save money, save time, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's such a, I tend to think, Jim, about that a lot, honestly.
Yeah, and I think just one different lens from the growth angle. Like if you look at like traditional marketing and traditional growth, and having spent a fair bit of career there, like attribution is still an open problem, because like, yeah, it's extremely hard to join your campaigns or your marketing events with your like actual transaction events. It's either like the events could be misclassified, or like there's drop of data and things like that. I wouldn't go as far as saying that like doing it in the Web3 space is perfect, but it's much better than what it is. And that's primarily because like data on the blockchain is a combination of like transaction data as well as user behavior data. And so like in terms of like figuring out like attribution and like conversion, this is pretty much like, yeah, as good as it gets, and like getting almost having the data in one place. So I think like that's one of the things which when like some of our value proposition to companies like who are adjacent to Web3 but like not actively involved, like I think this is kind of the value prop which hits the most, because like this is probably one of the best ways to be able to understand your users and like what they're doing compared to like some of the traditional systems which are out there.
Cool. Okay, pivoting a little, like what metrics do you find yourselves looking at the most when like assessing, either in your like projects day to day, or when you're just like assessing a project yourself, like TVL, transactions, users, like what is your favorite go-to metrics?
The favorite go-to metrics, yeah, it's when we're looking at projects, it's one of those things. Like for me, it always comes down to user adoption. That's TVL is a fine metric for some kinds of analytics, but realistically speaking, like how users are interacting with stuff is much more interesting. So I like seeing general adoption. That's why I love like the blockchain, the Web3 gaming space, because you really see pretty intense adoption in Web3 gaming. I mean, it's almost incredible, like, thousands to tens of thousands of people per day playing this, which might be different than like a DeFi article. That's a couple hundred people putting money in and out, things like that. So I always like to see pure numbers of users, which you have to abstract to addresses. But in the gaming space, you can abstract that to addresses pretty nicely, maybe more so than in like the DeFi space.
Yeah, I would say we don't. I would say we work with, so I mentioned in the beginning, like there's an ecosystem side of our business where we are working with some of these foundations directly. And one of the things that we work with them on is this problem of like, how do you measure user adoption? Like what's actually happening? And we always look at it through the lens of just retention. And we have a metric we provide to them. It's called native token recycling, or NTR. Which is really just about like if someone is given a set of coins or tokens, like does that result in more economic activity? Like, do they go do other actions on the chain? And it's pretty simple, but it's pretty basic. Just like, are you retaining users? Are they doing stuff on your chain?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, TVL, etc. makes sense, but that's kind of a lagging indicator for us. I think what we are most excited about is like new participating members for on-chain activity. And like that's, you can think of it as like newly created active members. And if we are able to drive that for a given project or for any sort of like, a given project, product and things, like we believe like we have been successful. So that's kind of what we focus on, that, and that's kind of the North Star metric we have aligned with most of our customers.
Okay, and on the topic of metrics, like how do you filter out what is organic growth versus like what's being caused by like maybe people farming for an airdrop or people like some sort of regulatory action against a protocol that is like people moving away from it? Like how do you stay on top of both what the like on-chain data is saying as well as just like the what is happening off-chain?
Yeah, we've at Flipside helped some teams. Our data science team in particular has helped teams, particularly in airdrop farming. And it's actually, if you have a holistic view of all of the data, it's actually pretty easy to figure out who is actually doing the airdrop farming just by straight up network clustering. And so, we'll look at and build out networks, and then you can pretty easily pinpoint, okay, like based on this certain transaction profile and behavior, like this one cluster. I mean, we've seen cases where people have spun up activity around over 100,000 different addresses to try to airdrop farm, and you can quickly be like, okay, this is actually all one identity, and remove that. And I think that comes back to like, do you have this basically complete high fidelity view of all the data to be able to do that?
Yeah, I would categorize that as a Sybil attack. And like, I think, those are definitely things like you want to discount in terms of all of your metrics and things and kind of go from there. Like definitely. So those are things which I think the project or the product owner needs to be most aware of, and then like kind of like discount that in metrics and I ideally actively stop them. That's it. We do feel like, I think having because like Web3 companies and blockchain companies are there to solve the problem, and users are getting their problems solved in other different ways, right? And you sometimes do need to incentivize those users to actually be like come to your platform to solve them. So I think like the right set of incentive mechanisms are definitely required to acquire new users and things like that. You definitely need to discount for like some of the malicious activity which is going on, or which is like not conducive to like creating long-term value, and those are some things which you need to discount for. And I think like the way we kind of like most often than not, I think like it kind of you figure those out by staying plugged in. So being in the right set of channels, the right set of like, getting the right set of events and updates kind of helps you figure out. And then you kind of like need to go back and like basically like adjust your data or like adjust your queries to be able to do that. So that's kind of the typical process which we have followed.
Nothing to add from my side. Those guys, the two gentlemen that just spoke, are way bigger experts on that than me. Because for our customers, even if people are buying and selling and block trading, if you're getting revenue and fees from it, you still got to account for it.
The last thing I would add here is like, if you are building any system which exposes really like any sort of monetary incentive, like people will figure out ways to try to attack it.
The old quote is like, anything you measure, as soon as you start measuring something and use as a usable metric, it stops being a usable metric. So anything you try to actually like totally normalize stops being good to use for metrics here. So you just have to always be kind of creative in how you're thinking about the data.
Okay, so we've covered a lot so far, and I guess just like to kind of encompass maybe like some of everything maybe that you said so far, like what is the best piece of advice you would give someone who is like starting out in this space and like, or like who's starting out either integrating blockchain data into their company or is like trying to get into it more themselves?
The only thing I'll start with is just dive in. it's one of those things where all this stuff is kind of seems easy in the abstract. Once you put fingers on keyboards, it gets real tricky real quickly. So as with all engineering things, and maybe it's because I'm a very tactile learner, so I only learn about doing stuff, but I think that goes for this, is it's real hard to read about this and abstract it in your mind. Like you just got to start programming. You just got to start putting fingers on keyboards.
There's a lot of, I would say, on a surface level, it looks like there's like so much going on. There's so many different blockchains. There's so many different protocols. And yes, there are, but like a lot of the concepts are very similar from chain to chain. I mean, with their own crazy nuance, but there's a lot of overlap. So, if you can dive into EVM and understand EVM, that unlocks a whole bunch of chains that you could work with, or protocols you could work with and understand. Similarly, like you IBC. And so I think, like Pat said, just dive in, pick a spot, and start to learn. And then you'll start to quickly realize, like, oh, what I'm learning here in EVM, like they call it this over in Solana or this in IBC. And you can quickly kind of eventually move around between these ecosystems to understand, what's happening.
Yeah, Jim put it so much better than I could have, which is like it can seem incredibly overwhelming at first, and there are so many terms, and there's so much slang, and there's just so many things. So just get in and start doing it. You'll realize that it's not quite as complicated as it seems from the outside.
Yeah, I think Jim and Pat covered most of the interesting and important things. The final thing I would like to add on that is I think use the data available to actually form your opinion and judgment, and then just not buy into a hype cycle and things like that. So use it's super important for people starting in to actually dive deep into to a very a niche narrow area and kind of expand out from there and form your own thesis as to actually what's going on based on the data. And I think what we are kind of this is what makes this space really unique and interesting, because there's just actually so much data available publicly, and then you can use platforms such as Flipside and stuff like that to access that data, and then use that to form your thesis of the world.
Okay, and we talked about examples of successes, but do any of you have any concrete examples that you want to share about challenges you faced when dealing with blockchain data and how you overcame them?
Well, I'll say, I mentioned the issues we had with Flow because of missing data. Same stuff happened with Oasis. So it's pretty common to basically have, due to sporks or forks or hard forks or different flavors of that, to have data kind of change underneath you. One of the things you also see is, Solana is a great one to pick on. I like Solana a lot, so I'm not picking on it maliciously. But when you have outages, it causes a lot of real tricky problems because, suddenly you might just be cruising along, having a nice Tuesday, and then suddenly everything goes to hell in Solana world. You have millions of transactions, that's all flooding in. All the nodes are crashing, everything like that. So there's always something like that you're kind of dealing with. And in Solana world, it's even worse because most blockchains are growing at maybe a gig or 2 or 3 a month or something. Solana's long-term goal is to be doing 5 petabytes of data a year. That's they designed the chain to scale up to 5 petabytes of data a year, and I think they will get there. Most for what we are all doing, most data sets are not designed. Tooling is not designed to work with data that size. It's just you can kind of do it. You can hack around it, different things like that, but that's not a level of data that's very common, and yet we're kind of growing to that with a lot of the blockchains right now.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Drag.
No, go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say another common thing that we've ran into in the past is dealing with uncled blocks. And so if you're following too close to the head of the chain and you get a block that isn't actually the confirmed block, you can have a different set of events or different set of history. And so building in basically automated processes to deal with those situations can be pretty tricky. It's a hard engineering problem. And so that's one of those that we've had to tackle for a number of chains.
It gets back to thinking through your use case really deeply. Because, for instance, for us, for accounting purposes, we don't need to have up to the second transaction. So if you're doing a payment system, the second someone sends the payment, you want your screen to display that payment went out there, even if it's not fully confirmed yet by the blockchain. For accounting purposes, if it's not confirmed by the blockchain, you're probably not confirming it for your own records anyway. So when we index the blockchain, we do tend to lag however many blocks behind the is considered confirmed. So on Ethereum, it's like 32. On blockchain, on Bitcoin, it's 6. So we'll lag that far behind when we're syncing because we don't need up to the second. We need good data that is accounting relative. So it's another thing to think about when you're designing your systems around around your use case exactly.
Yeah, and like another thing there is we've Metrics DAO, we helped incubate some of their stuff and provide the data for that. And I think like if you think you mentioned before, like the universe of data seems so big and what tools can deal with. And like I would say when you're building something, ask yourself like, what is actually the universe of data I need for like my application? And so like a lot of Web3 apps like need a very small subset. And so you can actually like reduce down the size of your data by ingesting smaller bits of it and not having to think about like petabytes and petabytes of data.
Yeah, I think the challenge which I would like to highlight and kind of going on a first slightly different track from what Jim and Pat mentioned is actually talent. I think it's super hard, like Pat, I think mentioned was like there are probably 100 people in the world who can do the right like smart contract dev. I feel like the number is similar for like blockchain data analysis, and it's super hard to hire for these roles. And I think so this is what we realize, like we really have to rely on like internal growth and of our existing folks to actually be able to scale up to like the demand of our customers. And of course, like we have started adding like different questions and things that like actually test aptitude and like kind of add some challenges thing, but that's just not enough. So I think like one of the things which is which could be a limiting factor for this space is like, do we have enough talent entering into this space who can actually like analyze this data and create like valuable products and insights out of it? So yeah, I would say that has been one of the biggest challenges.
And someone in the Q&A did ask, what is the structure of the data? And they said nothing like SQL one assumes. And in fact, that's not true. Like we do get our data into a data warehouse where we can do SQL queries on it. So it's one of the techniques here is like, in order for everyone to scale their businesses, there is a goal of making data as accessible to engineers as possible. Like everything can't be insanely complicated, totally different. So, using data warehouses that engineers are used to and then having structures like SQL are really important. Now the data looks kind of weird in there, don't get me wrong. It's a little bit square peg, round hole, but you still have to get it in there and make it useful. And that's one of the, we've had some success pulling in data engineers and data scientists from other industries. Once we get all the blockchain data together, then data scientists actually can do a really good job with it and be really, really fast because they're used to working in a fast-paced environment. So it goes for this as well.
Yeah, we always think about like how do you meet the engineer or the data scientist, like where their skills are. Like if you can try to like reduce like having them to like jump into another realm and just get started with what they have, you can start to build out your product a lot faster.
All right. And on that note, we have like a little bit over 10 minutes left. So we're going to pivot into some of the submitted questions. And I know we answered some of them going along, but there are a couple different ones. So I'm going to start in the questions tab. There are a couple that have like upvotes. Someone said, any thoughts on products such as Nansen Query, which provide structured data across multiple chains?
Jim, why don't you take that, buddy?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Nansen has a great product. I think there's a lot of different data providers in the space. I think going back to some of our conversations, you need to ask yourself, like, what is it that you are trying to solve with data? And so like, are you looking for really large breadth comprehensibility of data? Do you want specific metrics that you're then going to build on top of those? And so like all these different providers solve different parts of the space. Some are just really niche providers for a certain ecosystem, and they provide amazing metrics for that. And so I think you have to ask yourself, what is it that you're after, and what does that product have? Another thing, we have a product coming in the coming weeks called Live Query. Live Query lets you query sort of any API, so like any blockchain node to any of your favorite crypto data provider, and bring that data into Flipside's ecosystem. And so we're actually partnering with lots of different niche data providers and different ecosystems to bring all of this data in, to have sort of one unified access point that you can marry with a lot of Flipside's rich curated data. So I think having all of these different providers is amazing. There's so much to cover, and it helps push the whole space forward.
Okay, the next question is, in what way can we integrate blockchain with AI, or I guess like blockchain data?
I'll jump on that a little bit. I think there's a couple of really interesting parts of this, which will come up. I mean, first of all, be incredibly cautious about that kind of question. It's a fun question, but at the end of the day, like when you go through these macro periods of startup realignment, or VC money realignment, which we're going through right now, where you had billions of dollars going into crypto companies, now moving over to AI companies. What you have is a subset of people who are like, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to capitalize on that by putting both words in a sentence, and that's now what we are doing. So it's one of those things like be skeptical at a high level when you do hear the terms blockchain and AI together, because they actually are relatively orthogonal. AI is especially AI as it exists today. The AI trend we're going through right now is all around generative AI, which is generative. You played with Midjourney, you played with ChatGPT. These are all things that, given a prompt, will generate something back at you, which is really very different than kind of like AI for analytics, which we saw in the last 10 years come out. So that's AI, machine learning, things like that. But they're obviously related, but it's a slightly different trend that VCs are investing in today. The places where I really see this interesting would be, so first and foremost, one of the things that I really like is, in this generative world, it's not going to be long before we do actually have AIs kind of starting businesses. And there might still be there's going to be a man behind the curtain kind of doing stuff, or a man or a woman. There's going to be a person behind the curtain doing stuff, but there's going to be the AI actually, creating a website, posting a product, emailing a factory to build the product, and then selling it. And the best way for an AI actually to interact with money is going to be blockchain. It's pretty hard to actually build a lot of monetary integrations. If you want to send money, if you want to receive money, you can build an integration with Stripe. But if you want to send money, pay money, do all these different types of things, there's actually not great APIs for that outside of blockchain. So one of the places I actually see that there will be a really interesting, if we get to the point where we are trusting AI with money, the first place that I think that will happen, or trusting AI to spend money, the first place I think we'll see this rich integration between AI and blockchain is in the payment space, where AI is going out and paying contractors to build stuff. And maybe it's nonsensical. I have no idea. It'll be fun to see, but that's one of the places that I look out for. But be careful about those two words together.
Yeah, 100%. I think these sort of questions are kind of definitely up. I mean, we have been using machine learning from day one, but it's I would say it's dissimilar to the type of stuff which you're seeing in demos or the hype cycle now. It's basically solving simple problems. That's classify data and things like that based on historical data. That's a very well understood domain and space, and I think we do that well. But I think going back to what do our customers pay us for? Our customers pay us for providing them with data, which helps them understand their users better and help them acquire new users better. So I think our goal is to solve the data problem in this space, and not to and of course we would use new techniques as and when available, but kind of not get caught up in the hype cycle.
Yeah, the way the lens we look at that through, I think you put it right, Chirag, is we are always trying to, when we're building product, reduce friction for the user's workflow. And so like we ask ourselves that all the time when we're looking at people writing queries and trying to build insights from the data. And so can AI be used to reduce friction? And if it can and be plugged into certain parts of workflows, like especially generative AI, then maybe it makes sense to use it. But using, say, AI for the sake of using AI because it's the latest hype cycle, I don't think it makes sense. I think you need to look at it through the lens of like, what's your goal, what you're trying to achieve? Does it fit with that?
Okay, and we answered the one about the SQL data structure. And I think this next question is mostly directed at you, Pat. It says, is this accounting for transactions in crypto, which I think we're just referencing whether or not when you process transactions, if it's only crypto transactions or like more broad, like real world transactions.
Well, what happens ultimately is that you end up seeing all types of transactions from crypto to non-crypto. And even within there is like a lot of, there's a lot of ambiguity. Like is a USDC transaction a crypto transaction? Like, yeah, but it's also just this like one-to-one pegged, entity where you're spending essentially USD. But yeah, to answer the question entirely, what we do is we help account for any transaction in crypto. So let's say you are moving an NFT around and you pay a fee. That fee is expensible. You should be deducting that from your taxes, all that kind of stuff. Let's say you sell an NFT, you're getting some money for that. That is revenue that you are picking up. If you are receiving secondary royalties, if you have a contracting business or consulting business where you get paid in crypto, all of these are different places where you're paying fees or you're paying some amount of crypto out and you want to expense it. You're getting fees, you get that in, and you want to basically track it as revenue. And then, of course, everything that goes downstream of that, including how do you do the gain or loss on it? Every time you spend crypto, that's a taxable and accountable event. So if I give you, $5 of ETH, Rebecca, that right there is both. It is an accountable event that it's, $5 off my general ledger, but then it's also a taxable event that I just dispose of $5 of ETH, whatever cost basis I acquired that at. The difference between there is my gain loss that both needs to be accounted for as well as reported up to the IRS. So there's a lot of, when you get into doing accounting for crypto and tax for crypto, there's a lot of stuff that you have to be worried about and tracking, and that's what we make easy.
Okay, so now I'm going on to some questions that are in the chat, and I think this one is directed at Jim. It's how many nodes do you run per blockchain for resilience of service?
That's a great one. So you can think about this in two ways. So we have certain blockchains we run ourselves to get at certain types of data. And then we also have third-party providers that we use. And then a lot of these providers will expose, rather than expose an actual node, they expose like an RPC endpoint that behind it, they have lots of scale. So what we'll typically do with providers, and we have multiple providers as backup, is we will work with them in advance to say provision a certain amount of capacity. Because depending on what we're doing, there will be instances where our data engineering team turns on services, say to do historical backfill really rapidly, and all of a sudden you could be sending like millions of requests a minute to a service. And so what we'll do is we'll work with those providers and say, okay, like this is the capacity we need for this time. And they'll scale up to support it. And then if there's issues behind that, we will fall back to other chains. So it's a whole orchestration system between stuff we run, third parties, and then working in advance to figure out how much capacity you're going to need. More nodes or more providers, the better. Things break. Nodes break a lot for various reasons that you can't always control.
Okay, and with that, we are just about at time. So I think we're going to wrap up this webinar. But thank you everyone for coming. And this will be on YouTube if you want to watch it again. And thank you to our amazing panelists. I think it was a great discussion today. But everyone have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.